Okay, very good. Welcome to This Week in Environmental Justice. This is the day after the last day of the legislative session for 2021-2022. So it was the end of a two-year session.
We're here to talk about.
Good morning, Tamara. So we are here to talk about what happened with the bills that we were tracking.
What happened
on the environmental front? I hear that they went until 2 a.m.
Wait, what happened to Sign or Die? It wasn't at midnight. Doesn't Sign or Die happen at midnight?
Yes. However, when I checked with the offices, the people who are on the ground doing it, the poor legislative staffers, they said, well, we might be here till 2 a.m. Now, something may have happened. In the meantime, leadership may have made a call that we're shutting down by midnight and we're going to observe Sign or Die.
And for those who don't know, Sign or Die is a Latin term. I guess it means end or something. But at the end of the 2-year session, it stops the session. So it's a hard stop. Everything closes, and it's supposed to happen at midnight. Everything shuts down. So,
and legally they're required to be done.
They're legally to be done by midnight. Yeah, that's in the rules. That's in statutes in the Constitution.
However, in the past, before term limits, on such a night when you're at the end of the final day, literally, of the 2-year session, when he was speaker, Willie Brown would get around that by stopping the clock
literally taking the batteries out of the clock.
Right, so that they were legally in compliance while they continued to work until whatever it took. Maybe it was 3, 4 in the morning, but he would literally stop the clock in the chamber so that they were technically in compliance with the law.
Right.
But those days are gone. We don't get to do that kind of thing anymore, to skirt the law.
Right.
Lord, I miss the pre-term limits era. Anyhow, so today's legislative update is going to cover the bills that we talked about last time to find out what happened with them. First is AB 267 by Assemblymember Valladares. That was the CEQA exemption and extension for it to allow specific fire reduction projects on federal lands, facilitating thinning of forests and other fuel reduction activities to reduce the likelihood and severity of wildfire. That was ordered to the inactive file on August 29th, so that bill is dead. That's kind of a shocker because it looked like it was going to be a slam dunk. So there were some other factors in place. There may have been some objections for folks that didn't want to extend CEQA exemptions at all. I'm not sure what the politics were behind that, but that exemption is not going forward. But given the propensity we've had in recent years for wildfires, it looked like something that could and should have happened.
Right. I'm very surprised at that.
Yeah, I'll have to investigate. And maybe some more, a further update on that in a future podcast. Next is Assembly Bill 1857 by Cristina Garcia. That is the solid waste recycling credit that accrued to municipalities for burning solid waste. That has been repealed because, again, that statute was initially enacted in 1989. And since that time, we have a great deal more awareness of global warming and what burning of solid waste does to the atmosphere, the air quality, as well as the fact that we have a robust recycling industry now in California, which we did not have in the late 1980s. So that bill is on its way to the governor's desk. Right. It has passed. That probably an overdue piece of legislation, a little cleanup legislation. So the next one has to do with the pesticides. This is a new bill. It was not on the list last time, but since discovered it since the last podcast, and it was something that EJL has been tracking since summer of 2021, and that is AB 2146 by Assemblymember Bauer Kahan. Neonicotinoid pesticides. That is a new breed of pesticides that are being used nationwide. However, the environmental science sector has been warning the federal government for 12 years at least that this particular breed of newly engineered pesticides is absolutely fatal to the honeybee population and is decimating that population in North America. Why do we care about this? The honeybees are what they call cross-pollinators. They are insects that we are literally dependent upon to pollinate about 70% of our food crops. And the fact that that honeybee population in North America has declined by at least 75% since they introduced this new breed of pesticides is alarming. The federal government has been placed on notice about this. There's ample, overwhelming scientific evidence that they need to take action, that they need to ban these pesticides. Of course, there has been pushback at the federal level from Big Ag. We did a long blog article about this last summer, which folks can find on our website. And the feds have been extremely slow to take action, even under Biden. Under Trump, there was no action whatsoever. They were like, you have a blank check to use these neonicotinoids all you want. Who cares? Biden's taken the approach of, well, we need to study it. So what has recently happened and what triggered this legislation is that the Federal Department of Food and Agriculture essentially kicked the can down the road and said they would make a final determination about seriously restricting the use of these pesticides until 2024. Meanwhile, the honeybees continue to die.
Right.
They have issued some restrictions, which they're getting pushback on now, but they're nowhere near as broad as they need to be. So Assemblymember Bayer Khan took the approach of, we're taking action in California. The feds have dragged their feet long enough. So this bill prohibits starting, unfortunately, it doesn't start until January, doesn't take effect until January 1st, 2024. So we have to wait another year. But the bill will prohibit persons from selling, possessing, or using these, the shorthand term is neonics, these neonic pesticides for application to outdoor ornamental plants, trees, or turf, except for use on the protection of an agricultural commodity. So it's not as broad as it should be. Ideally, it ought to basically, in a perfect world, ban their use on all agricultural commodities as well. But it is an attempt, a first step to restrict the use of these pesticides. And it got pushback, even though it's far more limited than, the enviros want, and far more limited than the scientists are saying the type of, in terms of the type of action government needs to take. But it's an important first step. So the Environmental Justice League was a late supporter on that. Once we got wind of it, we will be on all these measures. We will be sending a letter to the governor requesting his signature on this one, because it's an important symbolic step, and hopefully it will lead to broader action in the not too distant future. Because if suddenly 70% of our food crops fail because they're not being cross-pollinated, we're going to be in trouble. And of course, it'll be too late by then. So really important bill, doesn't do enough, but definitely moves the needle on policy in a really critical area that is trying to protect our food chain.
So let me just clarify. So the exception was made that this this chemical is banned to be used as a pesticide on all outdoor plants, except for
plants, trees, or turf.
Yeah, but the agricultural plants can still be used on those.
They're leaving you alone. So
okay.
So if you're, for example, if you're at a winery and they have nice trees, shrub, roses, whatever, or if you're in a rose garden or anything else, a public park can't use these pesticides. So it does have sort of a significant scope. It's not as broad as it needs to be, but it is important. And it's meant as, again, an incremental step. A lot of these changes we see in legislation, as you know, are incremental. They're frustratingly incremental sometimes, as this one is, but it's an important first step. And I think the intent was to get something out there on the books so that California is on record as taking a policy position, given that the feds are dragging their feet.
Right.
And I think there's an issue with, if we had tried to ban it on agricultural commodities, number one, you would have had the California Farm Bureau fighting it tooth and nails, one of those bills where it comes up and every gun in the valley is blazing away at it. And the U.S. Department of Food and Ag might well have stepped in and said, you don't have the authority to do that. That's our
Right.
job. Back off, California. So it is what it is. We got. I think the assembly member got as much as she could. It is an important policy statement, if nothing else, and the feds are taking way too long on this issue.
Okay.
So that's that one. Hopefully we'll see more. And it's not just a single pesticide, it's an entire family of pesticides called neonicotinoids. And one of the key ingredients is nicotine, but it's not just harmful to bees. It is also recently, which has renewed pressure against it at the federal level, which the ag industry is trying to fight. It's also shown to be harmful to birds. And it's not just fatal to them, it compromises their insects' ability to navigate, for the bees to find their way back to the hive. It is damaging their fertility, so they can't reproduce. I mean, there's a lot of long-range effects that are going to be damaging to our ecosystem and our food crops. So again, it's sort of bewildering why the feds are taking so long to take meaningful action on this, given how harmful these things are. But again, big ag, there's big money behind it.
Right.
So that's that one.
Well, good for California.
Yes, glad to see that piece of legislation.
Right.
Next is Senate Bill 260 by Senators Weiner and Stern. That is the Climate Corporate Accountability Act. This is the one that would have required all U.S.-based corporations with annual gross revenues of $1 billion or more that conduct business in California to publicly disclose their greenhouse gas emissions. And the issue is that we're behind schedule on our AB 617 emissions goals. The law doesn't really have any teeth in terms of what the state can do regarding non-compliance. It's sort of a voluntary system right now, and this bill was at least an attempt to not conduct punitive enforcement, but to force public disclosure, and therefore there's a public humiliation aspect of, oh yeah, I'm a big polluter. So
the shame bills, right?
And given that, even though it didn't have any teeth in terms of hard penalties, it was taken up last night and failed passage on the Senate floor.
Right.
So I'm sure it was heavily lobbied against. It had significant opposition, but these members may bring this bill back again next year. We'll see. We'll see what the new AB 617 numbers say come 2023, mid 2023.
Right.
So that's that one. Not surprising, but it is surprising in that there was no actual penalties, and so we're not going to take any money out of your pocket with civil penalties. But clearly, the public humiliation factor is not something that corporations ignore. So,
yeah, I've had experience with those bills, with the shame bills, and especially when it's not part of an enforceable law, and then there's no punishment, right? And so the first thing is the cost. It costs a lot of money to collect that data, to report it. Who reports it? Where? How is it reported? What type of basis? And then under AB 32, industries have to report their emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. But those are certain industries have to report their greenhouse gas emissions, and that is public, right? They can offset it with the cap and trade program, which was established by AB 32. Right. But those shame bills are when you get to, if it's passed, if it's signed into law, it's always often challenged in court because it's
inconvenient.
Kind of crosses the line. It's inconvenient, but there's always a challenge on, does California or does this agency have this type of authority?
Right.
So that's, if it didn't get stopped in the legislature, it probably would have gotten stopped someplace else
in the
down
courts.
The line.
Right.
Yeah, in the courts.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So, and there's a question of how, if they're not if I'm not an emitter, if I don't have a factory, but I'm Amazon, why am I covered in the scope of this bill? That kind of thing.
Right. And
I'm sure Amazon is doing more than $1 billion of revenue in California because I'm on there all the time personally.
Right.
I mean, at first it was just books back in the late 90s.
I love it when it was books.
Now it's everything. you name it.
Right, right.
After the power outage recently, I went and bought a kerosene lamp
Oh,
with the fuel. So there are, I'm trying to be a good enviro, but I like to have my light during the power outage.
right,
So
right. We
it
go
was,
camping,
it was
so we have a supply of camping lamps
right, right.
when we
It was
have
the
the
cleanest
blackout.
possible kerosene I could find. It was good. Doesn't emit harmful smoke. So they
Right.
so they claim in the that's the thing. It's smokeless. There's no such thing really as smokeless kerosene, but they like to
Right,
advertise that it is.
right. Okay.
Okay. So I digress. Last bill is a bill that we were glad to see on green hydrogen by Senator Skinner, SB 1075. We were
Yeah, we
supporting
talked to her about that bill.
that. Initially would have created a clean hydrogen hub to support state bids for federal hydrogen hub grants. That had some issues, so that part was amended out. What remains and what is going on its way to the governor's desk is the portion requiring California Air Resources Board and the PUC, as well as the California Energy Commission, to incorporate hydrogen into their decarbonization strategies. Very important, and to require the Energy Commission to develop a definition for renewable hydrogen, which apparently we don't yet have. So these things are important in terms of heightening the importance of alternative forms of natural gas to offset emissions and to bring greenhouse gas and global warming under control. And given how hot the summers are, anything that moves the needle in this arena is more than welcome. So that bill passed early yesterday. It's on its way to the governor's desk. So congratulations to Senator
Congratulations,
Skinner.
Senator Skinner. Yeah, she came and talked to us about that bill. And I'm just very surprised there wasn't a state definition of renewable hydrogen, because if you recall during the Schwarzenegger era, right, he had the hydrogen highway, and that was going to travel down I-5, right, and connect all the cities through hydrogen fueling stations, the hydrogen highway. So you would think that it was defined at some point during that process.
Yeah, that may have been mostly Arnold spitballing. I don't think anything came of that. That was like, Arnold's version of Star Wars.
Right.
Remember that Reagan, the Strategic Defense Initiative? That never actually happened.
I sat through hours and hours of hearings at the Energy Commission on the hydrogen highway. Now,
oh my goodness.
I think maybe actually 4 stations may have been built at the time. And then they moved on, right? They're like, hydrogen's taking too long. We're going to other things. And because what we had discussed earlier, the feedstock for hydrogen may be, more harmful than good. So this discussion of renewable hydrogen and using a renewable feedstock for hydrogen. So, but I'm just shocked that that was at least the last 15 years that conversation's been going on, and there wasn't a definition for renewable hydrogen. So
yeah, I totally agree. That surprised me. I was like, all this work that's been done, and we do not have a definition for renewable hydrogen, which again indicates how little we've moved the needle on doing something other than electric. It's all electric is spending a lot of time, energy, and resources. It seems to be sucking up all the oxygen in the room. Electric is important, but there are other forms of non-fossil fuels that will reduce emissions faster in the short term.
Right.
And we need to be pursuing those. So this is this underscores that point that, look, we need to be moving in other directions than just electric if we're serious about greenhouse gas emissions and global warming and improving air quality in the poorest communities. So we were particularly appreciative of Senator Skinner bringing a measure like this forward.
Yeah, we'll have to congratulate her.
Yeah, because CARB and others, frankly, are not emphasizing things like hydrogen sufficiently, obviously, which is why this measure was necessary. So
right. That is true. We always say, let's make sure we codify the goals, but not the means to get there, right? Because technology happens so fast, and technology happens faster than legislation and rules and regulations on the state level. So, right, as we're speaking, the technologies into renewable hydrogen are being developed and growing, and are probably ready for market pretty soon. So, especially with the signal coming from this bill, hopefully the governor does sign it. So, we'll be putting out a hope Governor Newsom, you sign this bill letter soon, right?
Absolutely. Signature requests. Yes.
Signature request. That's what it's called. It's been a while since I've written one of those.
How quickly they forget.
I know. I'm like, what was that thing called where you want the governor to sign a signature request letter?
Yes.
Exactly. So that happens. So now we go. So the legislative session is over, done. Now these bills go to the governor, and the governor has 30 days to take action on the bill. So his actions are signing the bill, vetoing the bill, or just letting it sit in a pile. And if no action has happened, meaning a veto or a signature, then by default, that bill becomes law at the deadline.
Correct.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So
we've seen that used by governors in strategic ways that have backfired.
Yes, exactly.
Right, Governor Davis.
Yeah.
Right.
I didn't sign that into law.
I didn't sign that into law.
I'm just going to let it happen.
And then those bills, unless they were a urgency measure, go into effect January 1st, 2023. Wow. 2023.
Yeah. Except for the neonicotinoid bill, which for some reason is delayed by a year. That was interesting.
Right.
That may have been getting around the feds being nervous about the fact that California is stepping out there on its own.
Right. It also gives them time for probably DTSC to do some regulations on the enforcement.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. The Department of Toxic and Control. Wait.
Okay, well, that wraps it up for, yes, DTSC. I always have to remind myself what that acronym stands.
I always forget what's the S? Substance?
Toxic substance control.
Control, yeah.
I remember I had to memorize it when during the base reuse and base cleanup era when they were shutting down the military bases in the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was working for a state senator who down in the Bay Area, Barbara Lee, who was extremely active on that.
Right.
Make sure, hey, let's clean the toxic out before we start talking about coming in and doing something else with this land.
And because of that work you did, Tim, what was that, like 20, that was 30 years ago. But because of that.
Don't remind me.
Remind
me how old I am.
No, look, we're the same age. I always forget the 90s are like, wow. They're like 20 years ago was 2020, not 1990, which in my mind,
90s are
20 years ago in the 90s.
The 90s are what I used to think of as the 60s.
Right, yeah. But because of that work, a lot of like decommissioned, former military installations are beautiful parks and public spaces. So because of that, or they've been reused into office space, like in McClellan Park, and down here in Alameda, the decommissioned naval installations, a beautiful, area where there's wineries and soccer fields,
Alameda is
open pathways. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Alameda is what I'm concerned about.
Yeah. Because that was a whole island that was decommissioned. So because of your work, Tim, my family enjoys the Alameda coastline.
That's why they call it public service. Glad to be available.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
So the issue on those bases is the munitions and the fuel. Right. And the fact that when they're stored there for so long, they can very often, there's issues where literally some of those substances can seep into the soil, get into the water table, which is a big class action. You probably have seen it on the TV and in the news. Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. If you served at any time between 1953 and 1987, they have determined that carcinogenic toxins got into the water on that base. And anybody living on that base or in proximity to it during those years, they're eligible to participate in this class action. So it's really a shame that, you join the military, you serve your country, you put yourself at risk, and then, your own government poisons you inadvertently. Right. So hopefully those families will be able to get compensation, but if you don't have your health, good grief.
Right, exactly.
Yes. So that is it for this week in environmental justice.
Well, thank you for that update. I appreciate it. Thank you for your work.
Joining us this morning.
The Capitol.
You must teach me how to look less ghostly when I do a remote podcast from home.
You need a good ring light.
Yeah.
You need good light, good lighting.
A blue aura here.
Me too.
Supernatural aura.
Your blue aura, that's like your chakra. I think blue's your head. So that's just a lot of energy and thought coming. That you're so smart, Tim, and intelligent. That's
hopefully it's chakra. Positive energy.
It is. I'm getting the vibe. It's very positive.
Wonderful. Right. Well, thank you for those.
You.
Good vibe.
Yeah.